Hello and welcome to Chapter 4. This is all about Greece. So, Greece is kind of a small area, so I decided to back this up, kind of zoom in a little bit. So, Greece, one of the first big Greek civilizations, well, you have like some minor people living in the Aegean Sea, but then the next big group that you got to know about is the Minoans. And they don't actually live in Greece proper, they live on the island of Crete. So, they are called the Minoans because in some of Homer's story, or in like some of the ancient Greek tales, like if you remember Icarus's family, him and his dad, Daedalus, are prisoners of the king of Crete, who is Minos, so you get Minoans out of that. Yeah, some of the traits of the Minoan civilization, you got some cool stuff like they live in palace cities, and one of the big ones that you might know about is Knossos, which is still around now, and it's these big, beautiful palace cities with like, very vibrant paint and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool civilization. But eventually they start to decline. And before they declined, one of their contemporaries on the island, on the mainland Greece, were the Mycenaeans. And they're a much more warlike people. They're one of those Bronze Age civilizations. Some of their relics and stuff like that are still around. So they're pretty cool. And these people are Indo-European. I don't believe the Minoans are. But then there's this thing called the Bronze Age collapse. It's kind of a cool thing, Bronze Age collapse. We'll probably dedicate a whole episode to that at some point. Maybe not in the AP World Series, but look around on the channel. There's got to be a Bronze Age collapse video. But yeah, so there's the Bronze Age collapse, and the Minoans and the Mycenaeans kind of go down. The Minoans go down first, especially there's an island called Thera, north of Crete. And there's volcanic eruption on Thera, which is so cataclysmic that it destroys the island of Thera and like really screws with Crete's, agricultural stuff. Because you imagine when a volcanic eruption happens, not only does lava come out, there's a lot of ash, which messes with crop yields and stuff like that. And then the Mycenaeans come down too, and they are invaded by these new people called the Hellenes. And one of the big things to know is that the Greeks don't call themselves like the Greekoi or the Greeks. They call themselves the Helleniki, so like the Hellenes. So you have two groups. The Dorians are the ones who like settle around here. So that's the Dorians, and then the Aeolians go over here. So yeah. And one of the big traits of these new Hellenes is instead of having like one big tight kingdom, is they have lots of little city-states. Because if you think about the geography of Greece, it's like really mountainy. So, it's hard to maintain a large empire across it, at least in the really ancient world. So in this city-state system, we can erase Crete because it kind of falls out of prominence in the new system. They have these thing called the polises. Polis means city in Greek. And, you can think about what is like politics. It's like affairs of the polis. So that's the polis, and there's lots of little city-states, but over enough time, two of them become very prominent. And those are, you can probably guess, Sparta, and then Athens. And what is the current capital of Greece? Athens, excellent. So it's, the early polises are very important even today. So let's talk about some of these two big polises. You have Athens and Sparta. So if you think about it, it's kind of like a high school thing. Athens is the nerdier, like, more intellectual one. Sparta is the jock. The Spartans, they're very hardcore. They have like this corporatist, monarcho-fascist, crazy thing going on. And you live and die for the state and for warfare. And actually, their state is so dedicated to war that they don't actually do farming themselves. They have like the cities around them. The Helots do like stuff for them. So yeah, and so just crazy stuff of, to be a Spartan, like your rite of passage is sneaking up and killing a Helot and stuff like that. So they're like really crazy hardcore dudes. Then in Athens, you have a little more refined society. See, Athens is more on the water, so they have the whole maritime thing going, they're trading. Remember, the islands in the Aegean Sea, there were a lot of them. So they're like trading with those islands. They're trading with the Greeks in Western Anatolia. And there are also Greeks who are going all across the Mediterranean at this point. Southern Italy, southeastern France, just everywhere. So the Athenians are definitely more into that. And another thing the Athenians get into is democracy. So they have like, instead of the Spartan like military government type thing, they have the male citizens are able to directly vote, wealthy male citizens are able to vote on stuff. And instead of so you think America is more of a republic in that we elect people who vote on stuff for us. In Athens, they don't elect people, they vote on every issue. Can anyone think of another country that does something similar? Switzerland, where they all come together and vote. Instead of saying, while they do have a parliament, if there's like a big issue, they'll have like a referendum on it and everyone can vote on it. So yeah, so that's Sparta and Athens. And, you know, those are just two of the city-states, two of the polises. They kind of fight each other for a long time. There's some back and forth. Eventually, like we talked about way back in lesson 1, I believe, the Persians get really big and they cross the Hellespont, which is right here. I'll make that a little more. The Hellespont. So they cross and they're marching to invade. And as they're coming, there's a mountain pass here called Thermopylae, where there's mountains, then the ocean, and then like this thin pass in between. So some of the Spartans, led by King Leonidas, you know, you've probably seen the movie 300, they go and they defend the pass to hold off the Persians. Lots of Persians die in the battle. Well, eventually all the Spartans get killed. It's like a rallying cry for all the Greeks, you know, hey, these people aren't invincible, because like a lot of Persians die. And why do they die? We can, just to surmise real quick, the Greek military tool, or like what they do, is they have a group of guys with shields and long spears come together. And so they're called an individual guy is called a hoplite, because the shield is called like a hoplo, something like that. And a group of it is called a phalanx. So they have a group of these guys with spears and long spears and shields, and they stand close together. So it's like a porcupine or something like that. It's like really hard to attack. So you imagine like in this mountain pass, right? You have the ocean right here, and then you have like mountains along there. And even if you have like a massive army, the Greeks are set up along, so you're like walking into spikes, and your numbers don't really help. And not too much else on the Greeks. Well, before we get to that, one of the other things I like about the Spartans is they have this thing called laconic wit. So the area around Sparta is called Laconia. Let's see if I can find my, here we go. The area around Sparta is called Laconia. So that which is from Laconia is laconic. So their sense of humor is like really dry and brutal, and it's kind of funny. So some of the things they do is, at the Battle of Thermopylae, the Persians were just like, we have so many archers, we will block out the sun. And so the Spartans were just like, then we will fight in the shade. Stuff like that. Or there was like a visitor to Sparta, and he was just like, hey, you know, I've heard, or there's this guy who can impersonate a nightingale, which is a type of bird, a nightingale perfectly. And one of the Spartans just like, I have heard an actual nightingale. You know, so just like weird, out of the box type jokes. Yeah, so look it up, laconic wit. A lot of cool stuff on WikiQuote. Yeah, so that is the Spartans. And eventually, once the Persians get beaten back, all the Greeks work together to kick the Persians back. You know, you have such battles as Salamis and Marathon. And remember, after the Greeks win Marathon, there's this dude who runs to tell everybody that the Greeks have won. He runs 26.2 miles and he dies. So we commemorate that with a marathon. Yeah. So, yeah. Blah, blah, blah. That's the polises. You know, they have colonies going on all over the place. And then eventually they band together and fight each other. Some people join the Spartans, some people join the Athenians, all the polises get together, and that's called the Peloponnesian War. In the end, the Spartans kind of win, but it like took such a long time that everybody's like exhausted. And now that everybody's exhausted is perfect timing for, up here in the north, is this group called the Macedonians. And their capital is Pella. And their king is this guy, Philip, and Philip is able to take over most of the weakened polises and unite them. He's about to take over Sparta, and he sends this letter to the Spartans, and he's just like, if I defeat you, I will destroy you, and I'll burn all your fields and destroy Sparta and everything like that. And then, of course, the typical Spartan response, they send a single word, if. So he actually never took them over, and neither did his son, Alexander the Great. So his son, like I said, is Alexander the Great, and he keeps his father's plan going, and he invades the Greek colonies on the western coast of Anatolia, and then takes over. It can't fit on the board, but Alexander's empire is very big. Takes over like Egypt, a lot of the Middle East. Then he goes to the borders of India, and as we learned, that's what gets the Mauryan Empire going. See all that little connection and stuff like that. And so he spreads Greek culture around a lot of the Middle East of what had been ruled by the Persians. And so what is Greek culture? Well, it's something that had developed in the polises and that we can, kind of talk about is, so one of the things you have is philosophy. And so in Greek, philosophy, so philos means love, and Sophia is wisdom. So a love of wisdom. So it's people who are loving to learn and stuff like that. You have some big ones, Socrates, and he really gets the ball rolling with philosophy and stuff like that. And he has a student, Plato. And Plato then teaches this guy, Aristotle. And so what Plato does to teach people is he starts this thing called the Academy, which is like the first big, probably not the first school, but like one of the big first schools. And then Aristotle is one of Plato's students. And, the stuff these guys wrote is still very influential in society today. Plato wrote the Republic. And then Aristotle is actually Alexander the Great's tutor. So, yeah. Anything else? And, the Greeks have, plays. They have lots of cool stuff like that, theaters. And it's very influential on us today. And to wrap up, like I said, Aristotle is a tutor of Alexander the Great. So when Alexander the Great takes all of this over, he's, kind of a learned man. So they spread Greek culture. And so instead of it being called the Greekization of the Middle East, remember, the Greeks don't call themselves the Greeks. It is the Hellenization of the Middle East. And it's the spread of Hellenistic culture, which becomes like a Greek and Middle Eastern fusion in the places there are. It's kind of cool. There's some Greeks who go out all the way to the border with India, and it's called the Greco-Indian Kingdom, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom. So it's like a fusion of Buddha monuments and art, but in the Greek style. So it's so in AP World they really love cultural diffusions. That's a pretty good example of it. But then Alexander the Great dies when he's pretty young before he can, conquer the rest of the world. And after he dies, his generals split it up. So you have Greece and all that stays under the Archaeads and something like that. Then you have the Middle East goes to one of his generals, Seleucus. And Egypt goes to Ptolemy. Ptolemy is actually, who is the famous Egyptian we all know and love? She is, it's Cleopatra. It's Cleopatra. Ptolemy is Cleopatra's great grandfather. She's actually not Egyptian. She's one of the Greeks who ran Egypt after Alexander. So now the Greek world is nice and broken up and ready for another group to come in and take them over too. And that group would be next episode's focus, the Romans.